We're now going to begin our discussion of Chapter 15. This is one of the 3 chapters in Unit 6, or Week 6. And this chapter has a lot of really good information, and we've got quite a few charts to go through here to get this discussion covered. So let's get started on it. We're talking about product development and supply chain management. I guess the first question that an entrepreneur has to look at is he going to grow, or is he or she going to grow or not grow their business? You don't get the not grow business very often. Most people want to grow their businesses, and entrepreneurs, as you might guess, have a broad spectrum of opinions about growing their business. But irrespective of what your opinion may be about your business, there are some things to think about in growing a business. First of all, any type of growth in a business requires investment. It requires finances to make that growth occur. And the process of growing a business, first of all, can be very stressful. But more importantly, the process of growing a business can very quickly outstrip your financial resources, an entrepreneur's financial resources. And sometimes it's too late by the time the entrepreneur really figures out what's going on. So the growth trap is a major issue in growing a small business. It occurs when the firm's ability to either raise cash or generate cash falls behind its financial commitments for growing. And when that occurs, then typically the choices are pretty limited on what an entrepreneur can do, and the choices, for the most part, are not great choices. Most of the time, you'll see small businesses shut down. I have personally experienced small businesses doing a great job in their market, booking sales as fast as they could possibly book them, and then they went bankrupt because they could not provide the finances, they could not generate the cash internally to fund their growth. So remember, growth requires funding. It requires money to grow. Now, we talk a lot about innovation, and so we're going to begin a short discussion here on innovation and the advantages of innovation. Obviously, innovation and entrepreneurship go hand in hand. In fact, many small companies are products of innovation from previous backgrounds or previous experiences with products and services. So the thing I guess we need to realize about innovation is that it's not easy. It has to become almost a culture within a firm. And I can cite you several examples right now, as you probably can as well, of companies that we recognize as innovative companies, and companies who have ingrained in their culture the culture of innovation, and who are continually bringing new products to market as a result of their innovation. So for an entrepreneurial company to grow, innovation is almost a requirement for it. A company that comes to mind very quickly is Apple Computer, and what they've been able to do to innovate over the years to stay on top of their marketplace. A fantastic example. Another company that you don't hear very much about, I mean you hear it all the time because many of you use its services, but that has done a great job of innovating over the last 10 years is AT&T. So it's a great story there on innovation. Here was a company that controlled a major part of the landline telecommunications business, and recognized probably 15 years ago that market was going to slowly drift away, and then there were going to be many other markets spinning up in its place. And so they basically restructured, reformed themselves, reinvented themselves to be able to not only participate in the new markets, but to dominate the new markets in communications. So 2 really good examples right there of innovation at work. There's some tips you can take about reducing the risk of failure while innovating. I'll just hit 2 or 3 of these. Typically, innovation needs to be based on experience. I've developed a product. I've got that product in the market. I'm going to try to innovate off of that product or those product characteristics to be stronger in the market. Again, Apple is a great example here. Apple came onto the market, or really made it big in the market with their Mac series of computers, evolving into MacBook computers, and then evolving to iPad. And so, if you look, and then once iPad got established, they then hit with iPhones, and once iPod got established, they hit them with iPhones and iPads. Well, if you look at that whole series of products there, you'll see a chain or a line of innovation that actually began with the Mac computers, the desktops. And probably the one thing that stands out the most is their graphical user interface. And once they were able to develop the graphical user interface into a touchscreen technology, they were able to then apply that technology to every product that came after that. So if you go back to the Mac computers and the MacBooks, you'll see that there is a technology overlap in all of their products, from that basic Mac computer all the way up to where they are right now with the iPads and the iPhones. So one thing you want to do is base your innovations on things that you are already doing, things that you have in hand that's better than anybody else's, and see if you can take those and aggregate those or group those to make a penetration with new products in the marketplace. And you could cite other examples of companies that have been very good at doing this. In fact, the dominant company in the operating system business, Microsoft, is a good example of that as well. You want to pursue innovation that your customers believe will make their lives better. In other words, I have a group of customers that are buying products from me right now. I do not want to displace those customers from the products they are buying, but I want to enhance their experience to the point that they will not buy not only the old products but the new ones as well. And Apple, again, is a great example of that. The other thing that you've got to recognize is innovation is costly. It's costly just to begin innovation. But if I'm going to take innovation and the outputs of innovation and move it into the marketplace, I've got to have capital ready to finance that growth. Let's go back to our original comments from a few moments ago. Growth requires capital. It requires money. So if I'm going to innovate, I'm going to develop new products, I'm going to have to recognize I'm going to have to finance those products in order to get them to the market. A sustainable competitive advantage is a very important concept, and this is one I want you to remember. Sustainable competitive advantage. And innovation goes hand in hand with being able to create a sustainable competitive advantage. What that means is I'm going to create a value-creating position in the marketplace that's likely to endure over time. I'm going to position myself in the marketplace, not only now, but in years to come, or in a period of time to come, such that I have a competitive advantage that nobody else can keep up with. My competitors can't keep up with it. And you'll see the characteristics of a sustainable competitive advantage. It's difficult to imitate. It creates a really high barrier to market entry. How many of you right now would like to create a new iPhone or your version of an iPhone and go head-to-head with Apple in the marketplace for phones? It's very difficult. A few companies are making some inroads there, but for the most part it's been impossible to keep up with them. It's just too much coming out. The gap is too high. Most of the time, to create a sustainable competitive advantage, your ideas need to be patentable or copyrightable. You've got to be able to get some intellectual property protection on your ideas. And you've got to be able to create ever-increasing performance in your products, or in the innovation that comes along there in order to have a sustainable competitive advantage. And let's go back to the AT&T example. Again, Apple and AT&T are very, very large companies, but their model, the model they practice, the way they do their business can be duplicated with smaller businesses to some extent, at least the culture and the philosophy. So let's look at AT&T. AT&T was in a desperate situation along with several other big telecommunication companies. And by the way, some of those big telecommunications companies did not have the vision of AT&T, and so they basically are on life support right now, just trying to stay alive with much smaller markets and a contracted business size. So I come into the market with an iPhone 1, and before too long, in fact, in about a year, I hit the market with an iPhone 2. Well, what's the difference between an iPhone 1 and an iPhone 2? Higher performance capabilities. Each time I come out with a new iPhone product, it's got some performance features that none of the previous products had. And so you see what's going on there with that, creating that sustainable competitive advantage. I'm constantly coming out with similar products, or with a next generation product, but with higher performance, and that creates a tremendous competitive advantage, a tremendous barrier to competitors rising up against you. This is the competitive advantage life cycle. I've got just a few little arguments with this curve, but let me just show you. And the argument would come with the sales axis over there, the vertical axis. But the phases are correct. I develop, I deploy, and then I see a declining market for my product. So this becomes very quickly what we call the product life cycle curve, and we're going to move to that curve here in just a second. But basically, the product life cycle is a detailed picture of what happens to a specific product's sales and profits over time. So I can plot those. I can plot my sales over time with the product, and I can plot the accompanying profits with that product over time. And it's a very good test to indicate when a company needs to be entering the marketplace with new products. So let's look at the product life cycle curve just for a little bit. Here you see the sales curve in blue and the profit curve in red, and you'll see that the profit curve on introduction, the profit percentage will be, or I'm sorry, the ability to generate cash and generate profit is maximum once the market is entered into, and that growth, that profit growth, will continue up to a certain point that occurs before the sales maximizes. And so you can see what's going on there. As sales continue to climb, the profit curve climbs up, it peaks and begins to decline. Well, what's going on? Well, during that growth curve, the profit curve gets to a certain point where now I've got competition in the marketplace, I've got price competition, so my margins begin to decline even though my sales are growing. And so then after the sales peak and start coming down, that means I'm selling fewer units, yet the margins have continued to decline, and so my profit begins to fall off fairly quickly with time. So there's a point in there during the growth and maturity phases where I have to decide, based upon my life cycle, do I enter the market with a new product or with a follow-on product that's generated this characteristic, or can I adjust this product a little bit and extend its life and consequently extend my growth? But this is the classic product life cycle curve. Now the product development process is one that's fairly straightforward. We'll talk a little bit about some of these in just a moment. But first you have to accumulate the ideas. Then you do the business analysis on the ideas. I'm going to analyze the business case. And then I do my new product development once I decide what those products are going to be. And then once I go through the development cycle, which itself can be very costly and time consuming, I do a series of product testing before I enter the market. You'll see this product testing phase, which is really the steps between the product development to product testing and then into the marketplace. Sometimes with software products, you'll hear that called beta testing. That's where the software is developed. It goes into a very limited and controlled market just to do beta testing. We're going to test the operation to see if there's bugs, see if there's little things that we need to improve and fix before we go into a full market with an introduction with this product. So in the business analysis box, we've accumulated ideas. Now we're going to do some business analysis. This is where we look at various major factors of the new product ideas. Does the new product idea have a good relationship with our existing product line? Are we deviating too much from what we are already doing and have success with? What is the cost of development and the cost of introducing the product into the marketplace? What kind of personnel and facilities will I need for the new product? And is there going to be significant competition the moment I enter the marketplace? And how will the market respond to this new product idea? So those are all very key factors, require a lot of work to do, but that's part of the business case analysis, analyzing each product idea to see what that does from a business standpoint. Now, let's look at some broader aspects of new products, or let's say the total product. Some definitions here. Branding is a verbal and or symbolic means of identifying a product. You hear a lot of talk about branding in today's business. Branding typically occurs around the effort to try to establish a foothold, a sustainable foothold in a market. A brand name is a name that can be spoken. It can, Coca-Cola or Coke is a brand name. A brand mark is a brand that cannot be spoken, but yet it's tangible, and that would be an image like the traditional bottle of Coke. And then the brand image is a symbolic. It's also intangible. But when we think of Coca-Cola or we think of other well-known brands, there's certain images that come to mind that are more symbolic than anything else. So let's look at some examples here of that. This is kind of the broad area of brand identity. And you see here that for Lou's Lures, the brand mark would be the hook there with a little fly or whatever it's called on it. That's tangible. A brand name, in this case, would be Lou's Lures, and this is what you would see showing up on business cards and signs and advertising. That's tangible. And then the brand image. The brand image is that of a fisherman fishing. That's kind of intangible. So these are all components of the intellectual property surrounding a brand identity or product identity, and this is something that we have to be very aware of. Now we're going to talk more about intellectual property here in just a moment, but before we do that, let's look at some rules that the text has identified, the authors have identified for naming a product. Some of you right now are probably considering starting a new business, or you're thinking about a business you're going to want to start, and you're thinking about, well, what should we name the business, or what should we name our family of products? And so here's some rules you can look at. You want to select a name that's easy to pronounce and remember. You want to choose a descriptive name. Use a name that is eligible for legal protection. And select a name with promotional properties. And then select a name that can be used on several product lines of a similar nature. So what we're saying here is you want to select names that are catchy, simple, easy to use, that can be used over a broad range of products or a big product line. That is easy to say and sometimes very difficult to do. Another thing that we have to think about when we're developing our new products and our new companies is our product logos. So when you're designing a logo, and by the way, most particularly young entrepreneurs, when they're thinking of their product and thinking of their new company, the first thing they want to do is run out and design a logo. And I'm just telling you, logo designs are important, but that's not the first thing you should do. When it comes to designing a logo, after you decided on your product, after you've done a feasibility analysis, after you now understand exactly what I want to do with my small business, I can design a logo. You want to keep it simple. You want to design it for visibility. It's eye-catching. You want to leave it open to interpretation. If I look over here at this example on the right, that's Cengage Learning right here. They're the publishers of our textbook and these charts. And you can see their mark right here, and then their little logo sign right here. I'm not sure exactly what that image represents. I guess if we stare at it a little bit, probably various thoughts about publishing and book distribution and learning might come to mind. But certainly they've left it open to interpretation. Are they relentlessly consistent? Yes, they are. Cengage, everything they send out has that logo and that brand mark on it. And then we've got to recognize the importance of our logo design. And once we design the logo, that's something we're committing to use on every promotional thing we do for that product. Consistently, over and over again, we hammer that home until that image gets frozen in our customer's brain, so to speak. You want to get good advice on logos, good artistic device. In today's world, you want to think about logos that would project very nicely on internet websites and on computer monitors. And then don't think that the logo is going to sell your business. Behind that logo or in front of that logo, you've got to have outstanding products. So that's really what's driving what you're doing. So here's the definition for a trademark and a definition for a service mark. You might want to take note of these. A service mark is a legal term indicating the exclusive right to use a brand to identify a service. So it's a legal term that gives you an exclusive right to use a brand to identify a service. Some additional things to think about with the total product, and these also become very important. Packaging is very important in today's world. In fact, as I look at the amount of commerce that's occurring just over the internet, electronic commerce, and I look at the importance of packaging for a lot of reasons, I can see where there's going to be a lot of careers in the future opening up just in the packaging area. Package design, the development of packaging that minimizes the use of non-recyclable materials, the color and design of packaging, packaging designs that do not crush when they're shipped around. So packaging has a lot of considerations for the small company. It's very important aspect of what you're doing with a product. Labeling. A lot of requirements on labeling. We'll talk about this some more in just a moment. There's a lot of legal requirements on labeling right now, and more regulations being created as we speak. The government is getting more and more into this labeling requirement business, particularly on food products and drug products. In fact, I've looked at food products and drug product containers, and I scratch my head sometimes and wonder how do companies keep up with this? How can they afford to keep up with all of the details of the labeling requirements? And I can tell you what's happening there. They're doing their best to keep up, and any costs are being passed along to you. On warranties, a warranty is simply a promise that a product will do certain things over a certain period of time, and you have to be aware of what kind of warranties you're going to offer with your product, and then you have to budget those warranty costs into your annual budget. It's very important. It's easy to offer a warranty. It's not so easy to budget the cost of those warranty into your annual operating costs. So you have to be careful about that. Well, the product strategy is a kind of an overall idea package that defines the way your product component of the marketing mix is going to be used to achieve your objectives with it. In other words, I have a product strategy. I have a product. Now I want to develop the totality of the strategy that says, this is what the product's going to do. This is what the performance is going to be. This is what it will do for my customers. This is how I'm going to package it. This is how I'm going to market it. This is how I'm going to distribute it, and so forth and so on. That's the total product strategy. So let's look at kind of the makeup of the various levels in the product strategy. You have the lowest denominator, common denominator, is the product itself. Then you can have, around that product, you can begin to build up what's called a product line. That's the sum of the related individual product items. So now I've got multiple items of products. I was looking yesterday at a series at Waterpik Corporation. I don't know if you're familiar with Waterpiks or not, but they were a very clever device that's developed some years ago that's designed for oral health care and for other personal health items where you require kind of a pulsating water pump. And so Waterpik has done a real good job of that over the years, and they started out with just a basic water pump, and now they've got a whole series of products that go along with that basic water pump. They've continually improved the technology in the basic water pump, but they've also improved not only the size of the associated products, but the quality of the associated products that go with it. So now they have several product lines that developed off that single product. And so those several products then would be the product mix. That's the firm's total product lines. And then the product mix consistency is the similarity of product lines in a product mix. By similarity, we mean the common parts, the common technology, the common appearances, the common functions that all overlap with a product line. And I'll point you back to Apple here. You can see that consistency in all of their products. There's a lot of those characteristics that just go forward with every product. So let's look at this example right here. This is 180s LLC. They manufacture kind of sports apparel, or sports clothing, both for training and for actual competition, as well as workwear and battle gear. So you can see on the left-hand side the depth of the product lines that 180s LLC offers. Now, if you look across the top, you see the breadth of their product mix: the ear warmers, the gloves, the jackets, the booties, and so forth. Now, when I put this grid together right here, I can now get a picture of the combination of the product lines and the product mix for 180s LLC. And so, if I look there very carefully, you can see where is their kind of bread and butter product line. Looks like ear warmers right there. That's where they've done the greatest amount of penetration with that. And then you look at gloves, and you can see, well, that's their second highest penetration. You can see with jackets, they're just kind of beginning to scratch the surface. With booties, looks like that kind of a beginning there. With hats, they've got some penetration going there. And with eye gear, they're just beginning. And with scarves, they're just beginning. So you can look at take a quick look at that little example right there. You can see, well, this is where 180s LLC is playing in the marketplace. These are their products, and this is the relationship of the products and so forth. So it's a good way to look at a company's product lines and see if there's a cohesiveness or a sensibility to the product lines. And occasionally you'll see a company that'll just break out and just do something wacky that they've never done before. In fact, I'll give you a good example that many of you will not even know of this company. But years ago, there was a company called Collins Radio, no relationship to me, but they were dominant in the field of communications, radio communications, microwave communications, police communications, and so forth, all of that gear. In fact, a lot of the telecommunications backbone of the U.S. was handled by Collins radio equipment. This was back in the days when telephones were transmitting over long microwave links coast to coast, and satellites had not really come on the scene. And so Collins Radio dominated that market. Well, Art Collins, the CEO and founder of the company, decided all of a sudden that he wanted to get in the computer business. So now he began to branch off and try to develop computers to go along with his penetration, his domination in the radio communications business. Well, he was competing now with the IBMs of the world, the DEC computers of the world, some really, really big, ingrained computer manufacturing companies, and he just got his hat handed to him in this marketplace. In fact, it was such a terrible disaster that he lost his company. He had to sell the company in order to keep it going, and had to scale back his participation. And in the process, the market that he had dominated had begun to change, and he was unable to keep up with those changes because he had wasted all of his effort and capital in a market that he basically knew nothing about. Terrible strategy mistake. Now, here's a little chart that's kind of beneficial from an information standpoint. It shows you a good comparison of services marketing versus goods marketing. And remember now, in Chapter 15, we're kind of spinning off of Chapter 7, which was the original marketing chapter. So we went from Chapter 7 now to Chapter 17 and 18, and now into Chapter 8 and 15 and 16. So we're still talking about marketing. So here on the left-hand side are the characteristics of this type of marketing, and on the kind of to the left of the circle there, this column right here is just pure services marketing, and this column right here is pure goods marketing. So here I'm selling pure products, just hard products. Here I'm selling services, and so somewhere in between, which is true for most companies, is where we're going to be when we're selling both services and goods marketing. So here's some characteristics on services marketing. Intangible offerings. I don't have a package, a box that I send out with something in it. It occurs at the same time. Services marketing. There's less standardization. There's greater perishability. In other words, with services marketing, I'm giving you the service right now. It's not something I'm going to spread out over a period of time. It's something you sign up for right now. I give it to you. It goes away and it doesn't come back. On goods marketing, there's a lot of differences. It's tangible. It can occur at different times and still be the same product. There's a lot more standardization, much less perishability. And so you can see kind of the characteristics here versus the characteristics on services marketing. Somewhere in between is what we're calling the hybrid, the services and goods marketing together. And many companies fit into this area right here. So let's look at how we approach markets and market penetrations. And so here's some product strategy options we can think about. On the left-hand side are a bunch of alternatives. I can have one product. I can attempt to penetrate one market with that product. I can have one product that I'm going to aim at multiple markets. Remember, we said earlier that markets will tend to segment. Every market will have different segments within that market. And so right on down the list, I can have number 5, multiple products with one market, or multiple products in multiple markets. So there's a bunch of different combinations here I can think about. And I've got a bunch of options here. I can convince non-users in the targeted market to become customers. That's where I have one product, one market. I'm just working on that one market, so I'm going to go after non-users primarily. I could have persuade current customers to use more of the product. That's where I've got a modified product with one market. Or I can alert my current customers to new uses for the product. This is modified products into multiple markets. And there's several categories here these options will fit into. But those are the things that I have to think about. Once I've gotten into a market, I have to think about how can I get my loyal customers to buy more of my product or more of the product that's similar to what they already have. A lot of that goes back to our reputation too. Oftentimes, for instance, right now, I just went and bought a new iPhone 5. Well, why didn't I buy a Galaxy or some other type of phone? Those are perfectly good phones. But I was used to using iPhone 4, I'm sorry, an iPhone 3G is what I had prior. I'm used to the iPhone characteristics, the operating system, the user interface, all those things I was used to. I also had recognized or experienced a high quality products prior, and so all of that background, that history, went together to say, I'll just take an iPhone 5. I won't even look at any of the others because I don't want to spend all my time trying to figure out how to use a product. I just want to use the product. So here is a product marketing strategy that you can kind of see from an image or graphical standpoint. Again, here's these 6 different alternatives that we have from a strategy standpoint. So I have one product, a lamp. I can take that into one market, or I can take that into multiple markets. Those are basically my 2 choices with that one product. If I have a modified product, which is I'm going to take a table lamp, make a desk lamp out of it, it's still got the same wire in it, has a little bit different packaging, probably the same light bulb. I can take that into one market, or I can take it into multiple markets. If I've got multiple products, I can take them into one market, or I can take them into multiple markets. So I have a lot of alternatives here with just a few products. In fact, I have a friend whose family owns a company that builds nothing but lamps for hotels. And they supply lamps all over the world just for hotels. They've got a lamp company. They founded the company in Arkansas, finally had to move the production to China in order to get the economies of scale that they really had to have to compete in the marketplace. Most of the hotel desk lamps that you will now see are manufactured in China because it's cheap. Let's look just a little bit. That previous discussion was kind of on markets and market segments and how you decide how you want to penetrate a market with a product. We'll talk about all of these subjects more as we move into the course as well. On consumer protection, that's on the customer side of your product primarily. This occurs in the area of food, drugs, and product safety. And you can see here the labeling issues that existed prior to now, the Labeling Education Act of 1990, but all that is changing as we speak. There's a whole bunch of new labeling rules being generated right now by the bureaucracy. The Product Safety Act of 1972, the Consumer Product Safety Commission was created then, and they kind of monitor now what's going on in consumer product safety, and this is where you see the requirements of nutrition labeling. That act was updated in 1990 with the Nutrition Labeling Education Act of 1990, where they began to cover packaging, how you're to use a product, and the disposal of that packaging. So we have all kinds of legal requirements, particularly on consumer products, that we have to be aware of. Now let's look at some specific examples that you're well aware of, of the types of protections that we can get in the marketplace. And typically you'll hear this called sometimes intellectual property. Trademarks, patents, trade dress, copyrights, those are all fit into this category, this broad bucket that we call intellectual property. So you see the Coca-Cola symbol on the left, that's a trademark. On the right-hand side, you see the iPhone, and the iPhone primarily is protected by patents. A lot of the technologies used in the iPhone, those are patents that have been developed over a long period of time. On the left-hand side, you see, I think, an outtake on the Pirates of the Caribbean, and Jeffrey Rush and the other guy, I forgot his name now, in that scene right there. And that's a copyright type media. Media is copyrighted, so that film is copyrighted. You can't copy it illegally, technically speaking. If you ever get caught doing that, it can be very painful from a legal standpoint. Trade dress. Here you see DHL. DHL is the UPS of the international community. This for a long time was the leading hauler or freight hauler in the international community. I think UPS has just about caught them or surpassed them now. But they had very, unique trade dress. Everybody knew that. Well, UPS does too. The brown suit. They made a big deal about advertising with that. So that's what we call trade dress, and that can be protected legally as well. For trademark protection, we have the Lanham Trademark Act, and you can kind of read there what that grants for you. It grants you the exclusive right of use of a registered, non-generic name, symbol, or other mark to identify a product or service. Trademarks are filed and granted by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the PTO. You lose those rights to trademark protection if your mark enters into use as a generic term, in other words, it's broadly used by lots of different products, or if the mark is not labeled with the symbols TM or the little R with a circle around it, or the phrase registered in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So once you have a trademark, you've got to make sure that every time you use that trademark, that it's denoted or noted as a trademark. On patent protection, there's different types of patents: utility patents, design patents, plant patents. The most common patent is the utility patent, and this is the legal protection of the right of an inventor to make, use, or sell an invention. And typically these run, I think they run for about 20 years, and then they become free property. And there's some argument about exactly when is the right time to file for a patent. Sometimes you may well enter into a marketplace with a new product, having disclosed when you had the ideas, but not filing for the patent until the product's in the marketplace, and then file the patent. The reason why you want to be careful about the timing on filing for a patent is that once you file, you revealed a lot of your information about your technology to your competitors. They're watching the patent filings as well as you are. The patent becomes public information. A design patent is basically getting a patent on the appearance of a product, and the plant patent is exactly what it says. I'm getting a patent on the next rose bush that I've generated or created, or the next whatever kind of plant. It's on real live plants. I can get patents on those. Copyright is another form of legal protection, intellectual property. It's the exclusive right of a creator to reproduce, publish, perform, display, or sell his or her works. And you can see the symbol, the little C with a circle around it. And typically what you have to do is have some sort of a notation that says this is copyrighted information and when it was published in the copyright owner's name. And of course, trade dress are all elements of a firm's distinctive image or its look, and it can be copied or protected under trademark law. Now let's talk just a little bit about supply chain management. This is a very important topic. I almost wish that the authors would create a new chapter just to focus on supply chain. But let's talk just a little bit about that. So supply chain management is defined right here. It integrates and coordinates the means by which a firm creates or develops a product or service and delivers it to the customer. So supply chain is where it's kind of the beginning to end chain from when a product is created to when that product is sitting in the customer's hand. Distribution is the physical moving of the products and the establishing of intermediary relationships to support that movement. So oftentimes, if I'm shipping from my plant, I may ship initially in a truck that goes to an airport, loads onto a plane, flies to another city, loads into a truck, which goes to a warehouse, which gets the product into smaller trucks, and finally ends up setting that product on my customer's front porch. And so that's the entire distribution chain. That's all of the intermediary relationships that's required for me to get a product from my factory to my customer's facility. Distribution is a big deal right now, as is logistics. Logistics is the physical distribution. That's the activities of distribution involved in the physical relocation of products. A big activity in our country, and it's going to get much bigger with the advent of internet commerce. A channel of distribution is a system of relationships established to guide the movement of a product. So I can have multiple channels of distribution, or I can have single channels of distribution. It's pretty well my choice of how I want to distribute my product. So a direct channel is where, and we'll see a good little diagram here in a minute to show what these mean. Direct channel is when I am shipping directly to my customer. And the shipping, the media there is another big question. You know, what is the shipping? Is it trucks, boats, ships? Trucks, boats, airplanes. What is it? An indirect channel is another type of supply chain, distribution channel. And then a dual distribution is where I have more than one channels of distribution in play at one time with my product. So here's a good little chart to show us what we mean by that. On a direct channel is where I'm shipping directly to my customer, from producer to customer. A retailer channel is where I'm shipping to a retailer or industrial distributor, primarily to a warehouse, and then that retailer or industrial distributor will ship to the customer or get the product in the customer's hand. A wholesaler channel is where I have a wholesaler kind of into the distribution channel, and then the agent broker channel is where I have an agent or a broker in front of the wholesaler. If you look at this right-hand line right here, you see a basically a channel that describes the current supermarket industry. Producer is a person that's growing the carrots. An agent or broker is a broker who is purchasing from the growers and arranging sales with the wholesalers, and the shipping goes from the grower to the wholesaler. Then the wholesaler is selling those carrots to whoever, the local retailer, and then the retailer is selling those carrots to you when you come in. You need some carrots for your carrot salad. So from the farm to the broker to the wholesaler to the retail user to the consumer is the channel. And most of your food that you buy in the grocery store goes through that right-hand channel right there in that chart, this channel right here. And then I can look at different industries and different types of products, and I'll see different ways that products get distributed around their channels of distribution. Very, very intriguing. And this can get very complicated, or it can be very simple. Now, my challenge when I'm developing my company and my new product is establishing my distribution channels. What are they going to be? What's the best way for me to get my product into my customers, my users' hands? So I have to look at the cost. I have to look at, can I cover my entire market with this channel or these channels? What kind of control do I have over distribution? So these are all factors that I have to take into account when I'm building my distribution channel. On physical distribution, I have a lot of choices. I can use common carriers. I can use contract carriers. I can use private carriers. A lot of different choices. I can use a combination of the two. And this is, if I've got a large distribution or a large market that I'm playing into, this can be a fairly large function within your company of just optimizing how we actually ship goods around from our manufacturing facility to our customers or to warehouses or wherever we're taking that product in our channel. So in the scope of physical distribution, I have to also think about other things: storage of products, handling of materials, handling of the products, specifying responsibility for delivery terms. In fact, you'll see this is a very complicated process. If you've ever shipped anything very much, you know that it takes you a long time to set up all of these relationships so that when you're ready to ship, that shipping occurs seamlessly without interruption. And big companies have lots of people that do nothing but just work the distribution channels and the shipping and delivery aspects of their business. Think about what it's like to be a Lowe's or a Home Depot or a Walmart that's got distribution occurring like crazy all over the world. And so their buyers are out buying products that they won't see on their store shelves, and those products come in ultimately to a big distribution regional warehouse where then they then get shipped out to the big box retailers. Very complicated, and a large group of people within those companies that do nothing but just manage physical distribution of products. So in the terms, I have to decide what kind of delivery terms will I have. Will I pay for freight costs, or will they be free on board origin, FOB origin, freight collect? That means that I'll get your product. When you buy your product from me, I'll get it on board of whatever transportation we're going to use. You're responsible for it from there on in. The freight company will collect at delivery. I can select the carriers that I'm going to use. Another big deal there, trying to select carriers. And all the carriers have a lot of middlemen too in this planning and scheduling carriers. And that's not as straightforward as it sounds. You got to really know what's going on in that business. Who's going to bear the risk of damage? How am I going to select the modes of transportation? What's the best modes of transportation that's going to reduce my costs or keep my costs manageable for my operation? Well, as a result of all this challenges in distribution and packaging and everything else, we see new types of companies springing up called logistics companies that basically give you cradle-to-grave distribution capabilities. They do trucking, they do packaging, they do warehousing, they do everything that's needed to get a product from your factory into your customers' hands. In fact, we have one or two in our area that are doing very well at this. First of all, establishing warehouses, and then contracting with manufacturers to do packaging for them and to do shipping for them, and that's a very nice business for this company once they've been established in it. And they're operating, I think, mostly in Texas and in the Southeast. This is a company headquartered in Paris. A third-party logistics firm is a firm that provides transportation and distribution services to companies that prefer to focus their efforts on other facets of their business. In other words, the third-party logistics firms handles everything for a company on the distribution and transportation side. A fourth-party logistics firm, coordinates every aspect of a manufacturer's or distributor's supply chain and acts as the sole point of contact between that company and all of its logistics and information service providers. So if I have a large company and I'm shipping lots of products, this fourth-party logistics firm, I'm basically going to outsource my logistics planning and execution to this firm under contract. They then will work every aspect of logistics from that point on. And those are growing markets for companies here in the U.S. Well, here's some key terms you'll see in the chapter, and one thing I challenge my students to do is learn the business terms. Learn that when you get out of school and somebody says dual distribution, you'll know what that means, and if they say common carriers, you'll know what that means. All this information is covered in chapter 15 in our text. Long discussion, lots of charts to look at. This concludes chapter 15. I hope it has passed along some information for you. We'll next look at chapter 16, so let's get ready for that.